the Within Orb podcast. Come get Within Orb. Hello, my name is Jenn Zahrt, and welcome to Within Orb, a production of the Celestial Arts Education Library, a podcast bringing people together around the love of astrology, books. Join me as I interview people about the astrology books that changed their life and practice. You can support the podcast at withinorb.com. Welcome to another episode of Within Orb, and today we are flying out to Brooklyn, New York to get a slice of Nate Speare's brain pie. Nate, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
I'm just like, wow, Brooklyn, I miss it. So you're lucky.
You miss Brooklyn? I'll send a little bit of it, a little Brooklyn.
Oh, yeah, we're going to get it right now. Yeah, for sure. So before we get too deep into the weeds, we're recording, you're my first person that I'm speaking with post-election. So there's that, just to put that on the record. And you just started a Kickstarter, which is like so brave.
Thank you.
I'm in awe of your bravery to put yourself out there and kickstart. You're writing a book. You're writing a book.
Yeah, I am. Monumental projects, Kickstarter and writing a book.
Yeah.
And the Kickstarter being partly for the book. It's my fourth time doing a Kickstarter, so it doesn't feel as super brave as the first time, but it's always a brave thing to do. Yeah.
Shiver me timbers. I'm like, wow, I would not, but a bit of a veteran. So, and the book is also going to be maybe a future addition to the Kaylee collection.
Yes.
Oh.
I would, that would be an honor. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. It's a book that goes pretty deep into the weeds and wilds of the tropical zodiac. So
that's where we get into the weeds.
That's where we get into the weeds. Yeah,
well,
maybe quite literally the weeds. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I love that. So that ecological, deep ecology, winding the vines.
Yes.
Okay, so congratulations on getting that started. A link to that will be in the show notes, everyone. And also then this journey to be writing a book about astrology means at some point you must have gotten into astrology. So what was your first astrology book?
My first astrology book, well, I had thought about this and I had asked, does the secret language of birthdays count?
I mean, technically, but we keep that in a special place at Kaylee so that, when you walk into the building, that's not the first thing you see, since it is the first thing you see if you go to a Barnes & Noble,
Yeah. That's interesting from a folklore perspective, which I would bracket out the word folklore, because being introduced to that, when I was, 8 or something, it didn't set off this light bulb of, oh, I'm going to be an astrologer now. But it must have done something to my psyche. I think my first astrology book, and I don't remember exactly the order in which I read these, but the first probably serious astrology authors that I read were Alice Howell, her book Jungian Symbolism in Astrology, and also her other one, The Heavens Declare, The Astrological Ages and the Evolution of Consciousness. And then I read Liz Greene's book on Saturn, A New Look at an Old Devil, a classic. And I read this book called Aspects. It's one of these books in Special Topics in Astrology series. It's called Aspects. So I think these were the first astrology books I read, and I read them. The reason I can't remember the order, I think, is because I read them at the time when I was just it was my, in capital letters, getting obsessed with astrology, 2 months. So I probably read them all within a 5-month, 2 to 5 month span of time or something.
Wow. You know what? You're mentioning Alice Howell. I'm not sure. She might have appeared on the show one time before. That was one of my first books too. And I was also binge reading.
Yeah.
Something maybe about Alice makes you do that. If Alice Howell just happens to be in that first crop of books you get, you're just all right, I'm going to have to read everything.
Yeah. Well, Alice Howell had a way of really being able to communicate. I think she had also been a history teacher in high school or something. So she had this fascinating both archetypal and historical perspective. I was actually just listening to this old late 1990s TV interview with her recently. And she says some words about Aquarius that I really feel could be spoken for right now for Pluto and Aquarius, where she's talking about the danger of nihilism and of depersonalization or dehumanization, and how Aquarius can remember each person unto themselves, but sometimes Aquarius forgets the person to person or the heart to heart, and she makes the gesture of like reaching out her hand to another person's hand. And that's when this kind of random cruelty and nonsensical violence kind of creeps into humanity. So I listened to that and thought, whoa, those are prophetic words for this moment of like, don't forget the person to person and like that we are in bodies, you know? Right. So yeah, Alice Howell, great.
Yeah. So easy to read and just, what a throwback for me too. All right, So I am going to snatch you away from Brooklyn and stick you on a deserted island and ask you the most difficult question probably in all of the podcasting lands. What 3 books, besides The Ephemeris, would you take with you?
It's a tough one because I read, I love to read. And currently I feel like I'm in a place where I'm getting more into science fiction and weird fiction, which is why I'm so grateful. Like a little peek into behind the curtain, you turned my attention on to Jeff Vandermeer, and I've been and another gateway into science fiction recently for me has been Ursula K. Le Guin and her book The Left Hand of Darkness, which is just amazing. I feel like every astrologer should read weird fiction and science fiction, right? Or if you like to read, that is.
Yeah.
Because it just does so much for the imagination and like being able to get into the imaginal space. It's so hard. As obsessed as I am with astrology, like I don't get obsessed with a ton of astrology books. But there are certain, I have this book that is called The Myth Atlas. It's this big illustrated book of these different cosmologies from all around the world. Like it has like the Japanese world, the Aztec world, the Slavic world, and it shows each of them as like a different sort of shape of what the cosmos might look like in this world. And it's actually a book that's intended to be looked at by younger people, who are maybe just being introduced to mythology for the first time. And I do like a lot of storytelling youth groups. So I use that book with them all the time, and they get so into the different, like, oh, that's the sun goddess. Oh, that's the god of thunder. That's the god of wind. I think that I would actually, and I didn't expect this to be the response to your question, but I think this would be one of the 3 books I would have on a deserted island, because I think being able to envision and create cosmology would be useful under that circumstance.
Totally. Yeah. So world building, like, if it's just you and a bunch of wild creatures, you could come up with all kinds of new gods. Yeah. And worship the old gods.
Yeah. There's also a book that came out a few years ago called The Dawn of Everything, A New History of Humanity. And it's reaching like way, way, way back into history, and kind of challenging some of the core anthropological and historical assumptions we've had about human beings, like throughout the millennia, and arrives at what I think is a pretty, in some ways, liberating perspective about like the history of humanity before nation states, and just more like the autonomous human, and I think that would also be very useful, that perspective to have in a desert island scenario. Now, in terms of astrology books, I have been very influenced by Judith Hill and Astrology and Your Vital Force. It's a way to make the archetypal aspect of astrology, the ideational aspect of it, practical and tangible by like, you can make water at this to sun water or moon water to help, heal yourself or restore your vital force at these different times. So I think that could be really useful in a desert island scenario as well.
Yeah, for sure. So there's some astrological magic in that book.
Yeah. I mean, I'm very interested in, each person has their kind of take on astrological magic or their lineage. I really like the word remediation, and looking at different traditions of remediation and how does the astrologer create their own, or sort of birth their own forms of remediation in participation with transits and, in kinship with the planetary forces and stuff. So also Andrea Gehrz book, Astrological Remediation, I think could be, although now I'm going over 3 books, I guess, but that would also be great to have in a desert island scenario.
Imagine stepping into a room of 5,000 astrology books, turning a corner and stepping into a room of 2,000 more. The Celestial Arts Education Library is every astrologer's dream, and it can be yours. I invite you to come support Kaylee before you can visit physically. Your support will mean the creation of 52 new episodes of Within Orb next year, 4 issues of the Kaylee Review, our inaugural journal, and countless book talks, events, classes for our community. Visit our website, www.kaylee.institute/support, to select your level of care. Please help support Kaylee into the future, our future, so that we may study the future together. Thank you for listening. Please enjoy the rest of the show.
You know, I would say, as a nod to what my gateway was into astrology, there has to be a place on the mantle for James Hillman and Rafael López-Pedraza and complicated figure, but Joseph Campbell,
Wow.
You know, the sort of innovators of archetypal psychology and archetypal mythological thought after Jung. Without them, I would not have gotten into astrology in the first place, I don't think.
So, you know, like that classic Hillman quote about the acorn and the oak tree. If you go back, I was reading Dorian Greenbaum's special issue of Culture and Cosmos of Kepler's writings.
Yeah.
And inside of one of the translations, Kepler's going on and on about plants. And I'm kind of like, wait a minute, this is 400 years before Hillman, and Kepler's already on the beat.
Yeah, right.
You know, and
Right.
talking about
That's
these plant
amazing.
concepts, you know, and the astrology and the unfolding. And actually, if you talk about Andrea Gehrz as well, like that is already in teleology, like you're being pulled into your shape, like a plant is unfurling into its shape.
Right. You become more and more of yourself. You're meant to be something specific, and you become more and more of yourself with age.
But it's not a pushing, it's being pulled.
Yeah. Andrea Gehrz also quotes, who is it? The writer of Ensoulment. Is that?
Porphyry.
That's not that. Porphyry, yeah. That you're pulled by your heartfelt longings, and you let yourself be pulled by those heartfelt longings. I love that.
Wow.
Yeah.
When I hear the
Yeah.
word longing, it makes me think of the 8th house.
Yeah, the 8th house and its intensity. That's actually, well, slight tangent, but I work with longing, and as far as in some of the work I do with Astro-Erotics, with astrology and sexuality and relationships, I work sometimes with the 8th house in relationship with Pothos, the god of one of the Erotes, one of the siblings of Eros, the god of this just kind of, the imagery of Pothos is just this kind of insatiable longing. Like no matter what our relationship status or, you know, whatever, if we have a lover or not, it's like there is just this longing that is mystical that can never be satisfied. And so I think it was actually James Hillman who, maybe he was trying to quote Rumi or something. Or one of those, it sounds like one of those ecstatic poets, you know, he says like, the only solution to the longing for union is to find union with the longing. Anyway, yeah. So, so yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's always there. There is this gulf between someone's lived experience of their own consciousness of, you know, and we have a map of the chart to maybe help us navigate that. And then the communication of that.
Yeah, the communication of that and how shape-shifty it can be in terms of life situations and things we get into. And yeah, I know something I'm actually thinking about a lot lately is the sort of holding both truths of there's the teleological reality of like we're living into our soul's code and having a knowledge of having a sense of what that soul's code for you is or what that life purpose is, which you can find through the chart. Really clarifies a lot and fortifies you a lot in terms of living in the times we're living in, and also holding the other aspect of the truth, which is, in my experience at least, I think we want to allow our identities to be pretty fluid in certain ways, or like different roads we go down or different opportunities we take or how we respond to circumstances. Like we want to allow some fluidity and to, you know, kind of not conflate the soul's calling and things like that with certain predetermined job descriptions or you know, things like that, you know.
I love that. Like, oh, I have this placement, so that's my job in this life is to just do that.
Yeah, right.
One way that I've been able to play with breaking my own mind lately, and this is probably going to be in every episode because I just love it so much. But when you're saying the fluidity of identity, I'm like immediately going to the 3 levels of progressions that Robert Blaschke talks about in his book on progressions. Because you have secondary progressions, which are fairly common, although I'm learning that it's becoming uncommon because of the dominance of Hellenistic astrology right now. But, the secondary progressions being a day of your life equals a year of your life. So anybody born within 90 days of you on either side can kind of be you for a minute, or you be them, right? Either it's like, it's sort of mutual. And then on the tertiary level, because it's between the moon and the earth, that's an emotional reality. So that extends your timeline to 3 years before and after you. So when I've been thinking about people that I've been in relationship with, and not just romantic relationships, like best friends or just anybody, or even like people I didn't like very much, right? Like you could think about anybody born within 3 years on either side of you, forward and backwards. You can think about like, oh, the equivalent of when that person and I were having the best part of our connection, or the worst, is actually this date in that, like their birthday is here, and then I will become their chart in forward moving time in like 2 years, or I was that chart already when I was 18. And you can actually sort of see that fluidity of like, oh yeah, that 1 year was like this, and then I see that person and how they act, and I can see like there was a lot of similarity between how I was feeling in my emotional body in the tertiary progressed chart and like what that person's expression is of their natal chart.
That's brilliant. Yeah. I mean, and I mean, to take it to those levels of like primary and secondary and tertiary. Wow. I haven't gone into the tertiary, but it just reminds me of how I feel like that's been one of the most potent ways of learning and practicing astrology for me, is just looking at it in terms of the miracles of different relationships and how they unfold, like including best friendships and friends that come in and out of my life, and family relationships. And like astrology has been a big catalyst for me to have, more understanding and more compassion for certain family members and ancestors. By the way, I think that needs to be talked about more, because as popular as astrology is becoming these days, I think there's also this misconception that like it's something that only allows for more judgment or more prejudice or more like categorization or compartmentalization, where like I actually feel like for me it's been the opposite. It's been this huge kind of opening into a greater sense of compassion and understanding how like we're all existing on these different octaves of being, and how I can look at, what my grandfather or grandmother went through, through this language and see it in a completely different way.
And I think that really has roots in your archetypal lineage, in that when you understand what the various shapes of experience can be, as much as shapes can be plastic and distorted through relationship, you're also like, well, if you're hardcore Libra energy, you're never going to be Taurus energy.
Right.
And it's hard to understand that until you get a wrap around that archetypal. And then you're like, oh, that's what that is. Okay, there it is. And in a way, it actually fights the new F word, because you're like, oh, I don't need to change that person to be like me and eradicate them if they're not like me. I can actually just accept that there's Taurus energy and Libra energy and then Virgo energy and then Scorpio. And you kind of let the zodiac be, instead of trying to control it and eliminate something that is like not exactly like you,
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Yeah, great point.
I like your deserted island picks. Those are fun. You snuck a whole, you like, you know what? You have, because of the weird fiction, I'm sure, like your luggage is bigger on the inside than the outside. I'm sure that's what happened.
Yeah. On the inside, you mean on the inside?
You just packed, it's like a Mary Poppins bag. You just put way more books in there. It's like, wait a minute, Nate.
Oh, totally. I mean, when I started being introduced to this archetypal lineage, I actually did have this little green suitcase that I still actually have. And I met my most important teacher. I was like 19, 19 and a half. And this little green suitcase is a Mary Poppins suit. I will say to this day, it's a Mary Poppins suitcase. It can hold like so many books, so many clothes. I can travel just with this little suitcase, and
amazing,
and it's enough. So
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Oh my gosh! So when you come to Kaylee, then you'll have to bring it with you, and we'll have a photo op on the
I will.
porch.
Yeah. I have to like grease the wheels a little bit again,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes I feel like that with the building itself, like, it's like we need more books. Like, it needs to be like bigger on the inside than the outside. Like House of Leaves, another great book.
Yeah.
Like, we're talking about weird fiction. I remember just tearing through that. Actually, looking over the water at Brooklyn from Nolita when I was living in New York City ages ago. I loved House of Leaves. That was such a brilliant book.
Yeah. It's amazing.
Books that are bigger on the inside than the outside. Houses that are bigger on the inside that are outside. Suitcases that are bigger on the inside than the... Maybe this episode should be called Bigger on the Inside than the outside.
No, Jen, I think you're right. I think there's something to that because I think that also connects with the rewilding of the tropical zodiac as well.
Right, I know. Yeah, and I love also the way that your work, your energy, your mind brings this plasticity to something that could appear rigid because there's categories. There's a playfulness and the kind of stretching and an understanding of like the nature of change with the self.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I've always been interested in, because I have a performance art background as well, and like my undergrad degree was in experimental theater, and well, actually more classical theater, but I was getting into more the avant-garde and like, the kind of work that I liked. And then my M.F.A, my master's degree, is in fully performance art, experimental theater. So, and I've always been interested in this edge between making something really wild and kind of freestyle in certain ways, and then the edge of making something scientific and codified. And so I've actually got really interested in performance-oriented trainings that were very codified and specific, but then blending them with this kind of self-expressive ethos or way of working that was more experimental. So I feel like that, and that's still, there's still something of that within, like, astrology is a very codified system. We could say there is, it literally, like, there's a mathematical logic. There are, I think, as you say on the Revelor website, like there are planetary rules in addition to grammatical rules. There's a planetary grammar. And in a certain way, it's like astrology is about as codified as you can get and the way the zodiac works. But at the same time, like, how many different ways can that manifest? It's infinite, right? So
I know. Yeah. It's perfect for those of us who are thirsty for new things because it's never ending, giving new.
Yeah.
Even if you've mastered the rules in whichever system you've chosen, because it is a multifaceted system, there's a series of systems, plural, right? So wherever you kind of have your entry point in your domain of most experience, there's always something new.
Yeah, there's always something new. And there's always this process of observation and experience and kind of, sometimes I like to tell the universe to like experiment on me, like I just like saying that because I feel like there's also sometimes different control culture or fear mongering among astrologers, particularly in the realm of electional astrology. There's like this, we have to choose the right date and time, and we have to make sure this is a harm reduction election and things like, you know what? Just experiment on me.
I know.
Let's see what happens.
It reminds me when I've elected things on purpose that are somewhat like, you shouldn't do that. And then I'm well, I'm doing it anyway, just to see what happens. I'm like, oh, that happened. Okay. And it's not catastrophic yet. But I also think, without knowing that, without pushing that boundary and testing it anyway, you're not going to have your lived experience of why you shouldn't be doing that on a lunar eclipse conjunct Uranus, for example, whatever that is.
Yeah. Right. You're not going to know it, until you do it. And I think that's whether you take that approach or not, or whether you use that in terms of, planning your schedule or not. I think the image that has kept coming to me lately for the way I practice astrology is like being immersed in something, being kind of, it's like, marinate me in these things, or like soak me in this cauldron of animistic forces and spirits and planetary realities and sign realities. It really does feel like being immersed in something, being cooked or soaked in something. And not everybody is the kind of person that likes that idea of being,
a cosmic lobster.
Yeah.
Which is not the sign for Cancer.
A cosmic lobster. Yes, exactly. Not everyone wants to be a cosmic lobster. I think there's something devotional about it. I do think it works a little bit better when it's devotional like that. And not everyone wants that.
What I hear you
cool.
saying is actually like also a different way of engaging, which speaks a little bit to the why you don't like astrology books as much as perhaps other people who've been on the show, is that like your Gnostic reality is informed by something that's not verbal or written or going through your eyes. It's coming through your skin. It's coming through your feet. It's coming through the way you move your body, the way you're aware, and not necessarily like what so-and-so said and got published.
Yeah. I think you're right. And I'm taking a moment to reflect because I hadn't thought about that in connection with why I might not go to astrology books as much. I think there is just a need for more innovative language now and ways of writing astrology books even. And I'm sure you know far more about this than I, as someone with a library of astrology books, but innovating language and structure in astrology books in a way that's more rooted and inspiring to the historical moment that we're living in right now. That's not sort of referencing back again to kind of the modern ways of looking at things or dusting off the old ancient texts, both of which are important and both of which I do, but that is kind of finding a third way through as well, like finding a third contemporary way through as well that can be conversant with other paradigms that are really lively and hot right now.
I love that. So speaking of lively and hot and getting someone into the craft, are there any texts you would recommend for the beginner to use as a way of gateway into the stars to become a cosmic lobster of their own?
Yeah, if somebody is a total beginner, first of all, I think the way to learn astrology is to become obsessed with it. And maybe I'm saying that as somebody who is an obsessive person. Not everyone is obsessive, but I have a Sun-Pluto opposition, so it's like, like a lot of fixed energy in my chart. So, but I think getting obsessed with it is the way. And so the language tends to be something that is not learned from a single book, but that the person retains piecemeal through obsession in a way that then just kind of goes, I'm just kind of making this gesture of my fingers and hands kind of meshing together in my brain. But I think if someone is getting into it, I love Antaroz Ali's book, Experiential Astrology from the Map to the Territory, in terms of giving this really comprehensive introduction to the language of astrology. Comprehensive might be the wrong word. Maybe digestible, dynamic, entertaining, and alive.
Yeah.
Just being aware that he renames the traditional like planets, signs, and houses to forces. He calls them. Yeah, I can see you cringing.
I know, like no, not more stuff to memorize.
Right. Yeah.
I mean,
I promise you, it's good for beginners. But you might be asking the wrong person because I'm more avant-garde bent. Like you're not going to find Papa Saturn in me, Papa Saturn's Astrology Academy in me. So
I got you covered.
He calls planets, signs, and houses. He talks about them as forces, styles, and states. So planets are forces, signs are styles, and houses are states of being or states of consciousness. So like the 7th house is the ninth house is your state of faith, the 11th house is your state of community, those kinds of, anyway, so just little linguistic things, but they're designed to make it a little bit more like dynamic for the beginner. Anyway, yeah. I think that book is excellent. I also really like the Shamanic Astrology Handbook by Daniel Giamario, with the caveat that it seems to me that what can I say? His views on gender are too conservative, and I have a completely different bent. But that handbook has a really accessible, useful language. I also really like the book Astrology is Real by Rob Bresney that came out last year. And the reason I would recommend that to the beginner is because it's not insofar as learning the language of astrology, but there's like there are a million ways to learn the language of it. The reason I would recommend Bresney's book is because of the attitude. It's the way of thinking, and it's the frame of mind that is instilled through that book. Like there's a whole chapter on what is the theory of divination in the first place, and like what do we do when we are doing divination, and the perspective that he offers, it's like it's not too dense, it's not academic, it's a perspective that one can be like, oh yeah. The benefit of divining through astrology is that we have like at least 5,000 years worth of data on it, you know, and but divination is something we can do through many different, potentially any like means of communication with the universe, you know. So there's a lot in that book about like the theory of divination and why imagination is so important. Like, why is it so important to connect with imagination and with the imaginal realms, the realms that are beyond the ordinary senses, but that are just as real, and is imaginal realm is still a real realm to experience. Yeah. So that's another book I would recommend for beginners. Yeah.
Amazing. Wow. I love that. And I hadn't heard of that one yet. Maybe it is too new for my radar. So I'm excited to look into that last book, Astrology is Real by Rob Bresney.
Yeah. It came out last year. Yeah.
So besides being in Brooklyn, where can people find you online?
Oh, wow. They can find me on Instagram at weird.astro.body. That's my practice, weird astro body. Weird with the double meaning of weird, you know, WEIRD and WYRD. Mm-hmm. They can find me on Facebook at Nate Speare.
Spear like an E with Shakespeare, right? S-P.
Yeah, exactly. Spear with an E. Yeah, the silent E.
I love a superfluous letter in a name. I double N Jen, you know?
Thanks. I didn't choose it, but yeah, it's there. And my Substack is Weird Astro Body with a WYRD. Yeah,
okay.
Nate Speare, Weird Astro Body. Yeah, so they can find me in all those places. TikTok is the same as Insta, weird.astro.body.
Ooh, you're everywhere.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And you're on Kickstarter. So everybody, Go check that out. And thank you so much for being on the show and beaming into Kaylee.
It is my absolute pleasure and honor. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to Within Orb. To learn more about the Celestial Arts Education Library, or to become a member, visit our website at caeli.institute. That's www.caeli.institute. If you enjoyed this episode, please help spread the word. Follow or subscribe to Within Orb in your podcatcher of choice. Rate it 5 stars, or write us a happy review. This helps others find the show. We also want to give a big thanks to the indie band The E-Block for contributing their song Wake Up for our intro and outro music. You can find them at their website, eblockband.com. This is Jenn Zahrt, signing off for now. See you next time.